Hello and welcome back. My name is Rosie.
And my name is Paul.
And this is
It's
Sinister. So we are back with part 2 of the Joan Robinson Hill episode. I do have to apologise for it taking so long. I find this case absolutely fascinating, but I want to get so much research in to make sure that I am saying all the correct things and I have all the correct information. And there is a lot of research in this case.
Yeah, I still have got notes from the first episode of it.
Yes, and this will not be the last episode either. There will be at least one more episode following this. It's a hectic, massive case, and I just want to do it justice. So there will be at least one more episode.
Yeah, I'm just flicking through my notes there just to get back into date with it.
Yes, so if you can remember, we left off that Joan has just discovered that her husband John is still having an affair, and he had taken their son to his apartment that he still has.
And this was when he was giving pastries to the friends.
To all the friends,
and
yeah.
handing them out individually to.
Yes, and they weren't allowed to pick the pastries for themselves. He was telling them which pastries they were allowed to have.
And he was after giving Joan a horse tranquilizer.
He had admitted to that. Joan knew that she was having that. And he was medicating her a lot at this time to help her sleep, supposedly.
Okay.
And Joan also has 2 house guests staying. Their names are Diane and Eunice. So they're still staying at the moment. And she has just, in the last episode we left off, that she has just invited her friend Van over to talk about the obvious affair.
And the grand piano had arrived at the end of the last episode.
Oh, it arrived. Yeah, perfect. So John has now got his music room sorted how he wants it.
Spending over $1 million of today's money.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
It's an expensive room.
Very expensive room. I cannot imagine having such an expensive hobby, but go off.
This was one really expensive hobby for him, as he was getting loans for most of the money.
He was getting loans for most of the money.
He had the hobby, but someone else was paying for it.
Yeah.
Maybe more or less. The father-in-law was paying for it after it.
Oh, yes, Ash was paying for a lot of things. I find it so interesting that he could just live off other people's wealth and things like that. And he's not. He's a doctor. He's got every chance to make money. He's just choosing.
Yeah, but going by his doctor, he wouldn't have the best
track reputation. The thing is, his reputation never seemed to.
Was that stuff just brushed under the carpet?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was brushed under the carpet, so his reputation never really took a hit. But in saying that, I can't imagine him having been a good doctor. Now, people were very proud of the work that they got off him, I suppose, but when he was there, he made a lot of mistakes, and he also just didn't rock up for a lot of surgeries because he wanted to go play music or this or that.
Yeah, but like, say if music and this music room was such his ambition is in life, why would he risk losing all by going having an affair?
It's dumb, isn't it? But I guess sometimes people can be really stupid.
Yeah, because the way you spoke with Ash in the first episode, like he was very particular in who Joan seen and
yes,
like he
allowed this.
He know this, and he gave John money for his hobby.
It's weird, isn't it? But I guess too, like they were together, they had a kid together, like Joan and John had a kid together, they were living together, they were going to be together. Ash just wanted his daughter Joan happy. So I guess he was willing to give money to create a happy life overall. But Ash never loaned them money for the music room. Ash denied John money for the music room. He gave the money for the house and things like that. So that was what he got the loans for.
Yeah, okay.
And I guess those were just things to help Joan be comfortable in life and for his grandson as well.
Keep the son-in-law happy.
Yeah, but also give Joan a nice home that she can live in and like things like that. Who knows?
Yeah, okay.
But let's go back to Joan's story. Van arrived at the house and Joan announced to all 3 women, so as in Van, Diane and Eunice, that she wanted to play a game of bridge, which is a card game. I don't actually know it.
It would be the popular card game before it.
Yeah, did you play it?
No, not particularly.
Okay. Anyway, Joan wanted to take them all into the music room to play this game. Now, John was already in there, and she knew that. So the 3 women entered the room and sat at the opposite side to John. Now, remember, this is a massive room. They're miles apart. They're not, in each other's way or anything. but John was at the opposite end with his music playing loudly. I guess it's his room, technically. He can do whatever he wants. Now, the women were playing bridge, and they were apparently needing to yell at each other to communicate because his music was so loud. But Joan didn't seem too interested in playing the game. She was more interested in telling the women about John and his faults in their relationship, only stopping when John would move closer to the table as if to hear what she was saying. Joan ended up loudly declaring that their relationship seemed over, so she was going to see a lawyer on Monday to take John out of her will. Like, she did not care. She was saying this loud enough for him to hear. She did not care. But Van became uncomfortable. Like, obviously, this is like a different time period. So, remembering this is in the 1960s, she was uncomfortable. This was not the time for women to be talking about leaving their husbands and going against them and things like that. And Van asked to discuss it later, not where John could hear. So Joan said that she wanted John to hear the conversation. I suppose she more so wanted attention from him. Like, she wanted him to hear it. I'd say she just wanted attention.
She wanted him to know what she was saying.
Yeah. And maybe in her head she thought if he heard that she was threatening to leave him, he might actually pull his finger out and do something, become a better husband, father, things like that. I don't think John ever had that in him.
I would say basically he'd be losing out his music room.
Basically. Unfortunately, I have the feeling that John was never scared of actually losing Joan or even their son. Now, Van threatened to leave if she continued, but Joan pleaded with her to stay, and Van did under the condition that Joan stopped talking about her husband in front of him. Also fair. So the gang continued with the 4 women, and Joan started passing letters around the table instead of openly talking about it, saying that she wanted to take John out of her will and things like that. That was where Joan told the women about the bachelor apartment and John's general behaviour in their relationship. But at that moment, John put a slow romantic song on and came to the table standing behind Joan. And Diane suggested that the couple dance, which I think is really shit friend behaviour when Joan is discussing that he has had such terrible behaviour towards her lately. To then be like, well, why don't you dance? I think it's odd.
Yeah, that's what's we don't want to be listening to
That.
the fucked up marriage.
Yeah.
You know,
Go dance.
go dance. Stay quiet. Go away from me.
I feel, no, it sounds so sad that she just couldn't vent to her friends either because it just wasn't the time, period. But anyway, the couple danced to this slow romantic song and they were supposedly looking like a loving couple again. So the women left them to dance. And then John and Joan went to bed together for the first time in however long it had been. Eunice said that she walked past the couple's bedroom that night where John was standing over Joan. I believe Joan was asleep, but I'm not entirely sure. And John ended up saying to Eunice that she's feeling unwell and needs a shot. Eunice said that she didn't need a shot, she just needs you. Like, give her some attention. And he agreed, shutting the door on Eunice. You got to assume he gave it the shot. Joan woke up feeling unwell and thinking it was just a flu or something. Everyone continued with their days and Joan went back to sleep for the day. When Joan did wake, she told her house guests how happy John had made her the previous night and that he'd told her things she hadn't heard in their entire marriage. She told everyone that she thought it'd be all right between them from now on. So she wasn't going to the lawyer anymore. She wasn't ending their relationship.
But she reckons her plan worked.
What?
That she was trying to make John
too scared for her to leave and things. I'd say so. I'd say that was what was going through her head when she told her friends this. However, shortly after that, Joan became physically sick, running off to the bathroom to vomit, returning only to tell everyone that she's going back to bed because she's feeling weak and unwell. John, being the kind doctor that he is, checked on Joan regularly and ended up leaving the house to get her medications to make her feel better. Everything she attempted to consume, though, she brought back up and seemed to only be getting worse. As the evening went on, Joan began to get shakes and everything. She just seemed super unwell. So this is looking, at this point, like severe food poisoning or something along the lines of that. John felt her forehead, saying that he thinks it's just a virus and that he feels a little queasy himself. So there must be something going around or something they both ate, dismissing her illness quite a bit. Now, while Joan's sick in bed, John was more interested in focusing on some performance he had coming up and spending time with people rehearsing. And Diane finally got to discuss the job opportunity with Ash, and Ash ended up offering her such a low income that she declined it and decided that her and Eunice were going to leave town the following day. So John took the 2 women out for dinner with Robert again while Joan was super, super sick in bed and couldn't leave the house, and they didn't return home till later in the evening. John only brought Joan back some orange juice and then left the house again to see a musician. He didn't return back to the house until after midnight. So Joan was so sick. He's a doctor. He did not look after her. I understand, like, people get sick and you can't be at someone's beck and call 24/7 when they're unwell, but she's just deteriorating. He was just returning to give her a bit of juice or a bit of medication here and there and then leaving her again. I think it's a bit odd. And yeah, again, she can't keep anything down. It's probably been days since she's kept something in her system. So in the morning, Diana Nunes left, knowing John was again leaving his extremely sick wife, and John and Joan's housekeeper, Effie, was there to look after Joan. So Joan was left in the house with Effie and Effie's husband, Archer, and they were basically there to look after her. But John had given Effie strict instructions not to disturb Joan and to let her rest, but also to prevent Joan from taking any phone calls or having any house guests. So he was preventing Joan from using the phone. Weird, right?
Mm-hmm. I suppose, sure, would she be funny?
But
a lot of people, not sure, rich people, but a lot of people won't have phones back then, would they?
No, but apparently at that time, Joan, whenever she was at the house, she spent a lot of time on the phones because I guess they were all of her friends would have been rich. And they would have lots of phone calls. Apparently the phone would regularly be ringing for her with people wanting to speak to her. During this time period, Effie had to decline a lot of phone calls. So Ash arrived at the house, but Effie sent him away, as in her father, saying that Joan couldn't be disturbed. And as I said, numerous people called to speak to Joan and none were allowed to speak to her. Now Van, the friend from the previous night, was waiting to hear about the lawyer since the last she knew Joan was going to the lawyer on Monday. And Van was trying to call to see if she needed her to go with her to the lawyer.
Van is a woman.
Van is a woman, yeah. But again, Van was not allowed to speak to Joan. So Effie was declining all phone calls for Joan. Now, as I said, Effie's husband worked there as well. So in the afternoon, when Joan hadn't called for Effie all day, it was actually her husband that came to Effie quite concerned, encouraging Effie to check on Joan, that she was okay. Now, Effie was a bit iffy and irie about this because John had so strictly told her not to disturb Joan the whole day, but we're going into the afternoon, she's not had water, she's not had anything. So ignoring John's directions, Effie went into the bedroom where Joan was awake and told her how unwell she felt. Effie tried to comfort Joan by reminding her that John would be home soon with medications and things, and eventually he did come home. The following day, Effie was called by John to clean up after Joan. Clearly at this point, Joan couldn't leave the bed and body movements were happening in the bed, and these body movements were now containing blood, so it's really extreme.
So obviously it's more shitting, pissing than
She was, and what I think it's way worse, that it's containing blood.
not good.
No. And while Joan was that weak, that she couldn't leave the bed, John still wouldn't take her to hospital or provide a nurse for her or anything, and again left her for the day to go to a music recital, leaving her under the care of Effie, who was only trained as a housekeeper. The only directive John gave Effie was to make Joan have all of her medications for the day and left. He'd just given her a bottle of medications. Effie decided she'd rather drag Joan to the bathroom herself than leave her not completely clean, and with Joan's permission, she did so. However, while taking her to the bathroom, Joan became blue in the face and told Effie she doesn't want to die. Effie comforted her in this time and looked after her, cleaning her up, but Joan kept telling her that she thought she was going to pass away. Effie ended up calling out for her husband and asked him to call Ash and Rhea, but no one answered when they called the Robinson household. They also called for John, but he wasn't at his practice, so they left a message for him to take her to hospital. John was actually too busy performing a tuba solo at a kids' school to look after his sick wife. And his plans for that day were to go meet up with Anne while Joan was so sick she was no longer in control of her own body. And luckily, Effie had managed to get in contact with John while he was at the school, and he went to see Joan after the recital instead of seeing Anne. Shortly after John arrived at the home, Rhea arrived at the property, where she found John standing at the end of their bed while Joan was in it. Rhea was absolutely shocked by the state of Joan. She had no idea that she'd become so sick so quickly, but John had said he'd take her to hospital. Rhea said they'd call for an ambulance, but John refused, telling Rhea he would drive her himself to Sharpstown General Hospital. Now, Sharpstown General Hospital was a newer hospital, and it's 45 minutes away from where they live. While there is a well-established Texas medical center with all needed facilities, emergency rooms, everything you could possibly need, very well established, has been there for years, famous doctors, and it was only 15 minutes away from their home. So in the commotion, Rhea didn't really think too much about it. John had kind of said, I know doctors at Sharpstown. I'll call them, let them know she's coming. She's very unwell and they'll look after her so well. She'll have 5-star treatment, the whole shebang. However, I will say now, doctors had no idea she was coming. So they quickly got Joan ready and took her to the stairs, where Effie attempted to help her walk down the stairs, but John stopped her, demanding that Joan walk by herself, saying that she's capable of getting herself down the stairs. After getting her into the car, Ash arrived confused on how his daughter suddenly looks that unwell. But since John and Rhea were taking her to the hospital, he let them to go. Rhea stated that John drove like a snail, and she felt like they were never going to get there. Like, John didn't want them to get there.
It's like he was trying to
Prolong
time kind of thing.
to get her to the hospital. Apparently, John just put on his music and calmly went about driving like it was any normal day. Rhea ended up telling John to turn it off because she was getting so emotional over her daughter and he was just listening to music playing along as if he was at a recital or something. During the drive, Joan told her mum that she'd lost her vision, and Rhea asked John what his medical opinion on that was, but John at no point seemed concerned. He just said it was probably a blackout or something. They arrived at the hospital and Joan ended up being taken in, but it later came out that this hospital didn't have any emergency room facilities or an intensive care unit to actually cater to Joan. This was a small hospital you go to for minor issues. John knows that. He's a doctor, he's worked there. It really wasn't a hospital to go to in the condition that Joan was in. And like I said, John had worked at that hospital, so he knew very well what its capabilities were, knowing full well that they weren't it. The doctors and nurses attested to John not suggesting any urgency to Joan's care and only gave the symptoms of a stomach bug. However, once a nurse took her blood pressure, Joan was reading at concerning levels. Instantly, a doctor was called and he cancelled out his entire day's schedule to cater to Joan, considering how unwell she was. So this doctor starts thinking like salmonella or another bacterial infection would be the cause for Joan being this sick. But it appeared like doctors at this centre were quite out of their depths when catering to Joan.
But did these doctors not question why they brought her to this hospital?
Everyone was kind of questioning why John would take her there, is my very next line, instead of to a better established hospital. And John didn't stay with her. He dropped her there and then went on about his day. So while Joan was in hospital that day, the doctors questioned if Joan could possibly have septic shock from the illness and if that was why she'd become so sick. But they needed to do so many tests, and it was the 70s and tests took days to come back and things like that. It was 69. Sorry, I don't know why it says the 70s, it's the 60s. So it was later in that day that nurses became concerned about kidney failure due to some of Joan's symptoms. So they did what they could to help with increased fluids and things like that to try and flush out any possible kidney infections. Ash came to her bedside promising her yellow roses for the following day, but he had to actually be asked to leave by the nurses because he was just staying with Joan, kind of not in the way, but he just wouldn't leave her side, more so than her husband. But I guess that was his little girl, and he wanted to make sure she was okay.
He was a concerned father, of course, but would he not have moved to
another hospital?
He had the money.
He did have the money, and I guess an average person wouldn't really know the capabilities of a hospital. I couldn't tell you where there's a good hospital, where there's a bad hospital. I mean, hospitals get reputations for being slow or this or that, but could you say where has the best doctors or where has this as an average person? Not a doctor.
You'd have main hospitals, but you'd have hospitals that said health centres for minor.
Yeah.
We can go to main hospital
for big things. I know.
Well, just going by what the symptoms that she was showing.
Oh, 100%.
It's not so dark kind of thing.
Yeah, you need to go to an actual doctor, a hospital. Now, by 8 p.m. that day, the 18th of March, Joan had gotten worse and they finally brought in a specialist to diagnose severe kidney failure that she would be needing dialysis for. But her actual treating doctor at the time determined that Joan was too sick to move, so they couldn't move her to a dialysis hospital or anything like that. And they decided to do a type of bed dialysis, which would have been less effective, but I don't know what exactly they were doing. The only issue here was they needed John's permission before doing anything to Joan. Just a bit crazy.
Ash's permission won't.
Nope, had to be John's because he was next of kin.
All right.
Yeah. But it took them absolutely ages to get in contact with John. And after the call, it took him ages to arrive at the hospital. So he told Effie at the house they might be losing Joan, but it took him 2 more hours to get to the hospital and to like approve everything from the phone call. And that's when they were able to go through this type of bed dialysis thing. Why did it take him 2 hours?
Yeah.
He did end up staying there after Joan begged him to. So he went, approved it. He was going to leave. Joan begged him to stay, saying how scared she was with like all the tubes and everything. And he refused to stay in her room though. Wouldn't stay with her. He stayed at the hospital in like a doctor's area in case she needed him. And from there, Joan actually instructed the nurses to keep him comfortable. Like, she's sick as fuck, and he clearly couldn't care less about her, and she's making sure that the nurses keep him comfortable. During the bed dialysis, Joan indicated sudden heart failure. A nurse ran off to get help from doctors, and one nurse there saw Joan lift off the pillow, gasping for breath and calling out for John. Suddenly, blood escaped out of her mouth, enough to soak the pillow. She was given adrenaline, but it was too late. Joan passed away in the early hours of the morning on March 19th, 1969. And John was not with her. He was in the fucking hospital if he'd just stayed in her room. Now, John made a scene at the hospital, screaming, and then ran in, cradling Joan very briefly, but then told the nurses that he had to go call his mother. Not her parents, not her friends, not anyone else, his mother. And John also instructed a nurse to call one of his doctor friends. Again, not her parents. And why one of his doctor friends? So he went back to the doctor's lounge where he wailed about his dead wife while people were there and around him. Like, only while people, like, obviously we can't determine that, like, he wasn't crying when people weren't around him, but it kind of seemed to be a show put on for the doctors coming and going. And then this doctor friend and wife, his wife, arrived to console John, and that was that. So the wife found Joan's body still covered in blood, so she went and washed her. I'm not really sure why, but this wife of this doctor friend went and washed her. She said that she'd seen Joan before the game dinner they'd gone to the previous week. If you remember, on the Friday they went out to that dinner that John made them leave.
Yeah.
And she said that at that dinner, Joan looked better than ever, and her suddenly looking like this just didn't make any sense to her. Apparently, John came in crying numerous times while she was trying to like clean up Jo and just like get a bit of the blood off her and things. And this woman described him as constantly coming in to bother me. It wasn't, there was clearly no sympathy for him because he just didn't seem to actually care. It was just a bit of a show. So the law in Houston at the time was that an autopsy must be performed within 24 hours of death, before embalming and burial, obviously. But somehow that didn't happen. The doctor had gone to John saying he was arranging the post-mortem protocol to begin. And John said, yeah. But once that doctor left, John instructed his friend, the doctor friend with him, to contact the funeral home and have them come clean the body right then. So around 6 a.m. that morning, the funeral home removed Joan Robinson Hill's body from the hospital before any post-mortem inquiries had occurred. And the body was illegally embalmed, but it's not known if the funeral home was aware that it was done illegally. They'd done it before any investigation at all.
I was done before the funeral home came.
No, so the funeral home came, embalmed the body, but no investigation had occurred. No medical examiner had come, no coroner, no nothing had examined that body in any capacity.
So there was no postmortem?
No postmortem. And the hospital didn't have the facilities to do a postmortem, so specialists assumed it was taking place at the funeral home. So they were expecting like the body to be moved. They were going to go to the funeral home to do the postmortem, but obviously once the specialist arrived, he found Joan already embalmed with no autopsy done. All her blood gone from her body. So all vital fluids were drained, and he attempted to do an autopsy with what he could, what was left. The only cause of death that he could determine was some inflammation spread throughout the body, but a cause was unknown, and if a pathologist had been able to investigate the body fluids, it probably would have been much better determined. He ended up claiming it was pancreatitis, but it was essentially just an educated guess.
Yeah, there was no evidence.
No. It was said that her pancreas was a little inflamed, but yeah, nothing actually to go off. So it was after Joan had already been embalmed that John went to the Robinson home to tell Ash and Rhea of her death. At this time, the news spread around Houston, and Anne's friends comforted her, saying, quote, at least he doesn't have to get a divorce now.
So, sorry, how long was she dead so before they actually fought Ash and Rhea?
It would have been, I think it would have been, she would have already been embalmed for a few hours.
Then she was moved
So she passed away at like 3:30 in the morning. I think they told her about 9 a.m.
She was in and she was into the Undertakers and the post-mortem done on the sort of like the temporary, not a full post-mortem.
Yeah, like a makeshift, make do post-mortem. Yeah, she'd had all that done.
I was done before Ashton.
Rhea were aware. Yeah, terrible, isn't it?
Just like they'd done in the early hours in the morning.
That was such a rush job. Why did John want it so rushed? Like, why was he so wanting her in the ground? Now, the night before the funeral, Diane arrived back at the Hill home to find John watching a movie in the music room with a few friends. They were all laughing at this comedy playing on the TV. This upset Diane since she felt John should be grieving her friend more. I guess everyone does grieve differently. You can't really. It's a bit tricky.
Yeah, this was hanging out watching comedy with friends. This is kind of
a little bit fucked up. But in saying that, sometimes people just have to force themselves to be happy, or else they break. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just. Oh yeah, we said something. If it was a death that was going to happen, it was
a very sudden death.
Sudden death.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a lot of shock, things like that.
What age would she have been when she died?
She was only in her 30s. I'll tell you exactly.
She would have been 38.
38.
These notes come in handy.
Your notes are good, I know. Now, John followed Diane out of the room, saying he'd do anything to bring Joan back, but he didn't know about the pancreatitis. Diane said he should have had her treated earlier than what he had her treated, and John told her he wanted to take her to the hospital the morning she left, as in Diane had left, but Joan refused. And then he said to Diane, quote, "You know how she always was about hospitals." Diane was confused because she'd never heard of Joan disliking hospitals in any capacity. No one had ever heard of Joan disliking hospitals.
Yeah, because look, it's easy to cope with that now.
Yeah, but she pushed that Joan shouldn't have been so close to death before he took her to the hospital, which clearly she was, like, very close to death given that she passed away the night she was in hospital. She wasn't even there for 24 hours. Now, Diane left their home and went directly to Ash's, where she angrily discussed her theories and John's behaviour about Joan's illness with him, which she said made Ash visibly angry, obviously not towards her, but towards John. And even though Diane and Ash's previous discussion involved Ash giving her a salary that Diane was not happy about, so they ended a little rocky. The last time they'd spoken, they were a little rocky with each other. Wasn't an ideal situation. They were both there for Joan. They still had known each other a very long time. They just wanted Joan avenged, basically. The following morning, just before Joan's funeral, Ash went to the district attorney's office with one of the area's best lawyers. Here he told the district attorney that he believed Dr. John Hill murdered Joan. He went into detail about how Joan was a healthy young woman who had suddenly fallen ill after consuming pastries her husband had handpicked out for her, and only her. As well as once she became sick, John would not call for a doctor or allow anyone to enter her room. He also mentioned how he promised an intensive care room was set up for Joan at Sharpstown Hospital, but on arrival, no one had even been made aware John was coming, and there was no intensive care room at the entire hospital anyway. And that she died 15 hours after admission, being taken to the embalmer's table before an autopsy could be done. Ash had also spoken to numerous of the best doctors who informed him that it would be extremely unlikely for someone to die of pancreatitis, especially such a young, healthy woman. Ash then demanded a coroner go out and examine Joan's body before the funeral, so John couldn't have the satisfaction of Joan being buried without a proper cause of death. The district attorney organised this with one of the town's best medical examiners and informed him to even stop the funeral if necessary. The coroner went off at the hospital for not reporting this to his office, that she had been let out and embalmed before an examination. He attempted to get urine and blood samples from the hospital, but they let it be known that they'd already discarded all of her samples. No blood, no urine, no nothing. The coroner viewed Joan's body but found there was still stored parts of the pancreas and other organs with the last medical examiner's office, so he chose to leave her body untouched, allow the funeral to continue, and examine what they had on their file, since they had samples of everything. And the funeral continued. Now, after the funeral, Ash and Rhea got in their limo to be taken to the cemetery for burial, and here, John got in their car. So apparently he was walking to the car. Ash asked for the doors to be locked before he got in, but John and his son got into the car and drove with them, which they weren't happy about, but they didn't say anything to John. So they're fine. They're not talking, but they're just in the car. Once at the cemetery, Ash said loud enough for people to hear, quote, "If the law doesn't get this son of a bitch, I will." Over the following 2 weeks, Ash hounded the district attorney to have John charged with the death of Joan, but the district attorney couldn't do that until the coroner's report was released. Since nothing could be done, Ash started doing his own research, meeting up with people that knew John and Joan and what others had seen throughout this time. People discussed that surrounding Joan's funeral, John didn't appear to be grieving much at all. People said he was still showing off his music room to guests when they'd arrive at the house and was more interested in that than Joan. He'd also been told by doctors who worked with John that they had suspected he wanted to get rid of his wife and that doctors were regularly speculating what he had given to her, speculating an overdose of insulin to give her these symptoms.
And the doctors were
Speculating at his co-workers were like, we think he was trying to get rid of her. I wonder what he gave her to kill her. Like, they all very thoroughly thought he was the one that killed Joan. And town women were actually going around talking about how they thought it was disgusting, how he just abandoned her while she was so sick, and that the negligence alone should be a crime. Ash decided to hire his private investigator again and had extensive recounts written by Diane and Eunice of their week staying with the Hills, everything that happened. That's why we know so much information. They happily obliged, stating they had theories about the chocolate eclairs being poisoned, and that's why he was giving them to Joan. Effie stated that she felt Joan had been murdered right in front of her eyes. However, this was written by Ash, quoting Effie, and she signed it. So, like what he did with John, he had written a recount of everything that Effie had seen.
He was getting his own investigation done.
Yeah, but Effie didn't write it herself, which seems a bit odd. She just signed it at the end or something. And that was just a recount of everything that Effie had seen. But also, the Effie witnessed John rubbing Joan's hand, not in like a lovingly way, as if he was trying to rub away needle marks as they were getting Joan into the car to go to the hospital. I don't know if you can rub away needle marks.
I wouldn't think so.
Effie also pulled out a bottle of pills from her bag, supposedly, and said that John Hill had given her these pills for a headache when she'd complained of a headache one day, but that she knows better than to take medication off John. Apparently, Joan's son Robert was there when John had given Effie the pills and said, quote, "Don't take those pills or you'll go to sleep like my mother did and never wake up." But again, this was written by Ash and signed by Effie. And then supposedly John had taken Robert upstairs and whipped him after he said that. So who knows? I do have a feeling that Ash was maybe pushing more than what happened, just to kind of heighten it. Not to say that these things didn't happen, it just does seem a bit far-fetched. He also, like I said, wrote that Effie didn't write it, only told him that...
But maybe Effie wasn't able to write.
I was thinking that's quite possible too. I would say that Effie... It's very possible that she wasn't educated to write at this time, but Ash also stated that his own housekeeper had heard everything that Effie had said and could be witness to that. And that his housekeeper had witnessed everything, and that was signed by Effie, so it could all be confirmed by multiple parties. The issue is here though, Effie and her husband had continued to work for John Hill. So Ash had taken this information off to the district attorney, but the district attorney found it very odd that Effie would be so scared of John Hill, he's giving her medications that could possibly kill her, things like that, but continue to work for him instead of finding somewhere else to work. I just think so the district attorney found that odd. I find that too a little bit strange in saying that work is work and people put up with what they have to put up with sometimes.
Yeah, it's not like maybe their options were limited. There mightn't be other.
That's completely possible too.
And saying that she was probably being kept and fed.
Yeah, her bills are getting paid. Not her bills are getting paid, but she's got a job. She can't afford to not have a job. However, all these stories were quickly spread around the town by Ash and everyone else in the town to throw blame at John, regardless of whether the district attorney was taking it seriously or not. But the coroner's new report came out at the end of March, finding that Joan's cause of death was actually acute hepatitis and that it would be too hard to make a murder charge out of that. So the district attorney refused to have John charged with murder. Ash had doctors refusing to believe that someone dancing around at a ball on Friday, though, looking lively, could possibly die of acute hepatitis on a Tuesday, like on the following Tuesday, with doctors stating that they would stake their reputation on her not actually having hepatitis. So Ash looked over the coroner's report with these doctors for hours after. And Ash ended up hiring the former district attorney as his lawyer to have John charged with murder. So he was going a separate route. If this district attorney wasn't doing it, he'd have the next best thing. This man spoke to the coroner who did the report and asked if it was possible to inject someone with hepatitis, which the coroner said was possible. It had also been heard that Joan had eaten shellfish and snail leading up to her death, and that the coroner believed that it'd be more likely a reason for her illness, as in like food poisoning. And while he could have injected her with something to give her hepatitis, there was no sign of heavy metals or arsenic in Joan's autopsy, indicating that she hadn't been poisoned. But also too, no vital fluids, no nothing. Like that's what you need to confirm 100% that she had not been poisoned. So that investigation pursued, but it was a very tricky investigation. John also became aware that something was going on as he'd seen like friends and co-workers, cars parked outside Ash's home, and people at work would stop talking when he'd approach them. Now he knew that Ash was having friends and co-workers of John's going to his house and giving them information. John ended up going to the Robinson home to talk to Ash. He tried to shake his hand, but Ash refused, and then said he wasn't happy with either autopsy report and that he wanted another one. But John refused it, saying he didn't want his wife's grave disturbed, so Ash just asked him to leave. Now remember that. John didn't want Joan's grave disturbed, which that's fine if someone doesn't want that. But just remember that he was very forceful. He does not want her grave disturbed. After Joan's death, John didn't take long to start seeing Anne again. On the first visit since Joan's death, he apparently said to her, "Joan was prettier in her coffin than I ever saw her." What the fuck?
That's a bit fucked up.
It's so fucked up. On the 26th of May, which was less than 2 months after Joan's death, John obtained a license to marry Anne Kurth, and the pair married in private.
2 months after?
Less than 2 months after her death.
Okay. John, we're going to hang your own.
Once news spread around town, Ash attempted to use this as proof of motive, telling people that this was why John had killed Joan, since Joan wouldn't agree to the divorce. His lawyer didn't see this as clear proof, though, because obviously it's not clear proof. That's not evidence.
What's that?
But he knew the only way to settle Ash and his own curiosity would be letting a jury decide. So this was more informal, like a coroner's inquest with people, mainly doctors, dropping by and testifying. Not in front of a court, but just like one out at a time, giving their statements. So there were doctors testifying that since John Hill was a doctor, they couldn't understand his choice in hospital, and saying things like that. So there were doctors testifying that since John Hill was a doctor, they couldn't understand his choice in hospital and things like that. Like they couldn't understand why Joan hadn't sought proper medical care prior to like her death. And Dr. Nathan Roth, if you remember from...
So it started off John first.
Yes, he was John's first medical employer. He testified that John would regularly attempt to seduce female patients, and there were like regular similar testimonies like that. So basically, Dr. Nathan Roth was he was stating that John never seemed to care too much about Joan if he could go and do that behind her back. John didn't get a lawyer though because he was scared it would look like an admission of guilt, which obviously it's not, and he's such a dum-dum. Like imagine being smart enough to become a surgeon and you're such a dum-dum that you think getting a lawyer while on trial for murder is an admission of guilt.
Well, is there more to try is there?
No, this is kind of like an informal inquest at the moment, getting information. But he should still have a lawyer because he's being questioned, you know?
Yeah.
He can also afford a lawyer. He also wasn't getting many patients anymore due to everyone talking about him. So his reputation was now taking a hit.
Which is going to happen, especially with a doctor.
Absolutely.
Because then you don't go to the doctor, you're definitely not going to...
Oh my gosh, imagine that. Like, his wife died in his care. What hope do I have? Yeah. So Ash had written to the medical society about the charges against John and that he shouldn't be allowed to practice medicine anymore. The committee actually gave Ash an appointment to understand his perspective and possibly go through with that. Like they needed to speak to Ash first, but Ash didn't show, so that became void, basically. But if Ash had gone and shared his side of the story, shared what he knew about John's medical license could have been removed then. And there were rumours that Ash was attempting to buy people's testimonies against John, as well as spreading reputation-hindering rumours about John, including that John had a part to play in his brother Julian's suicide. If you remember...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's suicide.
It was a suicide. But the rumours were that he had helped Julian commit suicide and things like that. And it wasn't until John had heard that rumour about his brother that he decided to actually fight back. So John ended up taking a sodium pentothal injection. No, pentothal injection, I know, which is also known as truth serum, to plead his case. So basically, he declined doing a polygraph test. So he declined doing that, saying that given everything going on, he couldn't trust that his heart rate wouldn't speed up and things like that, because Joan's just passed away and all these things. He couldn't trust a machine, but he would trust someone to give him this truth serum injection.
But was he after being married or at this stage?
He was already married.
But that wasn't public?
Yeah, it was public. It was now known.
Oh, no.
So after they got married, Anne moved into Joan's home and everything. Now, I don't know how valid truth serum actually is. Have you ever heard of that being used in today's day and age?
I don't think I ever heard of it.
No. But regardless, no one was happy with how John answered the questions, since it seemed as if the truth serum hadn't completely worked. He was too calmly answering the questions, and usually people would ramble. So they'd get asked a question, they'd just ramble on because there's no stop. But he just answered the question and would move on. Yes, no, move on. They kept giving him more serum because, as I said, it didn't seem like it was working, but things didn't really seem right with his answers still. And he was giving differing recounts than other people's testimonies. So multiple people could have the same testimony on things, but he would give a completely different recount of events. So the doctor administering it didn't feel like it was working for him. However, ultimately, once asked if he injected Joan with anything to cause hepatitis, he said no. The doctor later stated that a psychopathic liar would be able to take the drug and not tell the truth. Only it wasn't foolproof, but John passed the test. There was nothing to convict John. There was proof he wasn't a good husband, likely unfaithful, but there was nothing to prove that he was guilty of Joan's murder. There might have been enough for medical negligence, but they were married, so it's different laws. He wasn't her treating medical provider, he was her spouse. So they needed to prove negligence. Ash Robinson ended up organising for Joan's body to be dug up, and another autopsy took place with the world's best doctors, ones of his choosing, as in Ash's choosing, that he was directly paying for. But since John had said no, Ash needed to go through legal grounds to have it approved, and after a lot of effort with the district attorney and things like that, it was approved. So on the 11th of August 1969, another autopsy was performed where John had his own team of doctors there watching to ensure that Ash's chosen doctor wouldn't have been bought by Ash, basically. So John had organised his own doctors to watch on as well to make sure everything was being done legit. And with all doctors looking into the casket, they opened it fresh. They took it out of the ground, they opened it. They were all there to witness all of that happen. And with all doctors looking into the casket, they found old dry mud, indicating that Joan's casket had already been opened since her burial. Weird, right? Now, John's the only one that has permission to do this because he's the next of kin. And he'd adamantly said that he did not want her grave disturbed. But they ended up discovering that John had organised her coffin to be opened 3 days after burial to remove a piece of jewellery, likely a ring. He just said jewellery, but they thought it could have been a wedding ring. But they said it was likely that he didn't tamper with the body. That was the doctor's findings. What they were particularly looking for was needle marks indicating that John had injected her with poison, but all marks were accounted for by the Sharpstown medical charts. Nothing odd appeared in this autopsy. But John was asked why he dug up Joan's body without telling anyone and explained that he was looking for a sentimental piece of jewellery he thought must have been buried with Joan, but on site realised she wasn't wearing. It was in the last episode, so you might not remember. So Joan's friend found the outfit for Joan to be buried wearing, and she had organised this, and she asked John if Joan should be buried wearing their wedding ring or any other jewellery, and John said no, that he wanted to keep the wedding ring. He didn't want her buried with jewellery, and so she didn't take any jewellery for Joan to be buried with. So how, in a matter of days, could John have forgotten that she wasn't buried with any jewellery on? She was only buried wearing a dress, that was it, and there was one other item in. It was like a type of hat she wore while horse racing. That was the only thing buried with her. And he forgot to the point that because he couldn't find the ring at home, supposedly he needed to dig up the body 3 days later. Weird.
But was this ring for pawning, for money? It's hardly sentimental value of his wedding ring.
Well, the thing is, he knew she wasn't wearing that.
Yeah, so he must have.
So why did he dig up her body? He knew she wasn't wearing jewelry.
I don't know, I suppose is it to extract any organs that could lead up to any of the postmortem?
I don't know. It's very weird. By the way, we don't know the answers for this. We
Oh,
don't
you
know.
don't?
No, we don't. It was never. It's such a fascinating. I just find it so.
So when they exhumed the body, so with all the doctors there, what did they do then?
They literally just looked it over for needle marks and things like that.
But weren't taken away to be literally cut open and see who the
Oh no, sorry.
proper postmortem.
There was a postmortem done. Examining doctor took pieces of organs and things like that and took them home for later investigation. Nothing was investigated then and there. They looked over her body, no marks were found. Another doctor had taken her brain, had her brain in the back of his car for some reason.
But is there any...
This will come out later.
Is there any signs that was done after the burial?
Is there any what?
Any signs that these parts were taken after the burial?
No, there's no signs of anything being taken after burial by John. It's really weird. There's no indication that he touched her body in any capacity while opening it up. That's what the doctors have declared. But
So I'll say after... Be up to the bowel systems, be clearing out, would the death be after
leaving something.
Casket or the coffin.
You know, all they could say, look, we have to remember this is 69, like medicine.
Yeah, I just looked there. They want to.
Yeah. But also, too,
they want the intelligence that we had no.
But if it makes you feel any better, you could have been a doctor in 69 with what you know.
Well, that's a fucking old.
Not like that with your brains.
I was born in 79.
It wasn't that. Sorry. No, so it's just a different time. He got his things that he needed to go and examine the body. A report would not come out until later. He needed time to examine, but no indication that John had touched the body based on what they knew in 69. That body should not have been embalmed, though. Like, that makes me so angry. We would probably have so many answers had she not been embalmed early. Now, meanwhile, John's married to Anne, and it's horrific for him. She's supposedly verbally and physically abusive towards him. She'd even broken his nose on one occasion. This is Anne. Now that he's married to Anne. And John starts regretting that marriage real quick. So John had to actually go to work and put his nose back into place himself. So John...
She surely knew what happened the last one.
Dumb. Yeah. No, she starts making his life hell. But I guess in that too, she's not the one with the money in that relationship. You know, Joan was the one with the money. She had all rights to the house and everything. John can just leave Anne. He doesn't have to kill her. However, so John starts regretting that marriage really quick, but his lawyers advise him not to divorce her because if she became mad at him, she might join forces with Ash against John. But Anne was only getting worse, so she would dress up like a nurse to sneak into John's work office and like find proof of assets and things like that. And she was burning photos of Joan while living in the same house as Robert, Joan's son, months after his mother's passed away.
And Robert, the son, is still living with John.
Yeah, he's got full access of Robert.
Even if he's still under...
But he hasn't been found guilty of murder. They don't even have enough to charge him on murder. You know, she had also hidden John's surgery instruments so that he couldn't work. It was very weird. So John just couldn't stick it anymore and took Anne on a drive. He parked up and, quote, romanced her in the back of the car. Shagged her in the back of the car. All the while, a load of movers were collecting all of Anne's belongings from the house and taking them back to Anne's home, like where she lives. So taking them out of like Joan and John's home, moving them back to Anne's home, where John had broken a window to like grant them access. What the fuck? What a moron. Like, that's not going to make her angry.
Yeah, she's already going to break his nose.
Yeah.
Well, it's had their own shag pad apartment.
I'm going to assume that after Joan passed away, he got rid of the apartment, because why would he need that when he has a full home to shag people in?
Yeah, but you think when Anne would not have to leave your home and move into this apartment, yeah?
Anne had kept her home. I don't know why, but she'd kept her home and moved in there. But, obviously in anger, Anne joined forces with Ash, leaving no other choice but a divorce between the couple, and it was a vicious one. By February 1970, quite possibly due to help from Anne, there was a new grand jury trial against John.
Yeah.
Anne was able to testify against John, because in the last load of testimonies and things, Anne and John were married and you can't testify against your partner. In her testimony, she stated that John killed Joan and also attempted to kill her, as in Anne, on 3 separate occasions. She also stated that John rigged his truth serum test and found an antidote to the serum. She also stated that he was extremely violent regularly with her. The thing was,
Who knows, she's just making all this up.
She could be making it all up. Why wouldn't you make up things against your ex-husband that's pissed you off? Moved you out of your home while shagging you in the back of a car. But doctors didn't believe for there to be an antidote to truth serum, so that part wasn't really held up in court too thoroughly, to be fair. Her testimony could be useful, but the thing was, it just didn't really have the hold of a grand jury. Like, it couldn't really sway a grand jury on its own, given that she was seen as hostile towards John and they were in the middle of their own divorce. The doctor doing the most recent autopsy testified, stating that Joan's death should have been reported to the medical examiner's office for immediate official examination, because the embalming before autopsy interfered with the study, making it impossible for a proper study, obviously. But ultimately, it kind of cleared John. So this man's testimony, the autopsy that happened after, when they dug up the body, you know what I'm talking about? His testimony basically cleared John. He said that there was no injection sites found on her hand or like her body that he could see, and there was no indication that John had disturbed her body when he had dug it back up, and no toxicological studies found any traces of poison. But again, embalming. He was able to state that the kidney failure that the doctors were treating her for wasn't actually the problem, and more of a result of the shock after having all the gastro-like symptoms for numerous days. And the actual problem that started Joan's illness was from an acute inflammation of some sort, but he couldn't work out what caused it. But it seemed likely to be something that she had ingested, possibly something she ate, like perhaps a pastry. However, he did say something along the lines of failure to provide medical attention at home and delay to hospitalize or seek treatment proved to be detrimental to Joan and was somewhat a contributing factor to her death.
I presume this is the only reason that if he was going to kill her, Joan, it would be because he wanted to be with Anne.
And the music room. Yeah.
So.
And he wants out of Anne. Yeah.
Yeah.
Terrible, isn't it? Imagine killing someone to be with someone else, and then you decide you don't even want to be with that other person that badly. In this report, the doctor also stated that if John were to be charged with murder over this, anyone whose partner suddenly becomes sick and dies would also have to be charged with murder. So with this, he was basically backing John with this information, which you're supposed to, regardless of what's going on, you have to do your job. And he did his job. So he basically backed John and then sent Ash Robinson the bill because Ash hired him and Ash was paying for this out of pocket.
That's the way. Doctor and wife. Any names for them, or
they are named, they're never brought up again.
Like it was his wife that cleaned the body.
Yeah. She said she was doing that as a friend because no friend would leave. Like, she wouldn't want to be left in that state looking like that.
That's part of the evidence.
That is part of evidence. That's what I mean. She was, like, they're washing away the evidence. So she's washing the body. Her husband's calling the funeral home to have this embalming process begin.
Do they not get questions about this?
No.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I reckon they should.
I do reckon they should. I wasn't there to be a detective at the time. They 100% should have. Why?
Is there any reason why they want?
It doesn't say. I guess they just didn't find. It was 1969. I guess they didn't find her death suspicious. They weren't questioned. People were just able to provide testimonies on John Hill if they felt the need to.
I mean, done so fast.
Yeah.
So why they not question was a doctor
and his wife were called before any other relative or anything. It's so weird. And look, she could have been completely innocent in this. She was there saying she was a friend. I wanted to wash her, clean her up. Why did the doctors at the hospital allow other people to come and see and touch a body? Why was she left in the open for people to walk in and... I don't know.
Like John had this in this hospital.
Not regularly, but he had worked in that hospital at times.
Yes, like the hospital probably does have to answer for two.
Yeah, they definitely do. And that was why the coroner had called up the hospital, if you remember me saying before. The coroner called up the hospital saying, why was it not reported that the embalming process took place? Like, you'd taken a body out, embalming process had taken place without a medical examiner providing, like, doing an examination of the body, basically. He went off at the hospital, and the hospital just basically said, we're so sorry, it won't happen again.
Good enough.
It really isn't good enough. It should not have ever happened.
Yeah, but then you look. This hospital, there's a regular doctor that works in place, come in with his partner, and you think this thing should be... You would be questioning.
Yeah. It's just, this is one of those cases where so many things led to this. Like, so many things went wrong for it to be a questionable case. Now, this trial continued while John was attempting to get custody of all of Joan's assets. So this trial is not even fucking over, and he's seeing what of Joan's he can get. Because Ash bought Joan properties and, mineral rigs or something like that. Like, he was in oil. He was an oil tycoon. He's getting her things to provide her an income. There's properties in her name. There's properties in, like, Robert's name, their sons. It's dangerous. So Joan's last amended will stated that all joint assets between herself and John would go to John in case that he outlived her, and that all of her own assets that are solely in her name that, like, Ash has bought for her, like the farm, mineral holdings, things like that, they were to go to her son, Robert, in a trust administered by John. So John was getting everything anyway.
Just say over the holidays.
Yeah. He had all access. However, so that was her last amended will that they found. Ash suddenly came forward with a new will that she had supposedly written while separated from John. In this will, it cut John off and left everything to her son under the custodianship of Ash. Now, remember the dinner where she was talking to her friends about how she needs to change her will to take John out of it? Because clearly she knew that her last amended will had John in it. And now Ash has this will. Anyway, it didn't seem like an actual legal will and more of an imitation of what a legal will should be. And wasn't witnessed by attorneys or anything. There was no legal witnesses on it. But when John took this to the DA's office, since they were already investigating him, the district attorney didn't really seem to care, and they dismissed it for the time being. That, like, Ash had this will. He was like, I don't really care. Like, we're not dealing with this right now. We're going to deal with your murder trial. And if you want to contest that will later, contest that will later. So John was kind of questioned / cross-examined in front of a grand jury, but he was informed that he was able to leave at any time and that his answers could be used against him with the grand jury. So he didn't need to answer anything he didn't want to. Like, what kind of a trial is going on here?
Yeah, you do. Run short, you're not.
Yeah, weird. So during this questioning, he admitted to fighting with Joan over the bachelor apartment. He said he couldn't remember what they had for dinner the night before Joan got sick, and food poisoning never occurred to him. Even though he was a doctor and stuff, he never thought it could be food poisoning, so he never thought to keep recount of the food she'd eaten in the days leading up to her getting sick.
That's the first thing you're asked before you go to hospital or someone goes sick.
Yep, couldn't remember what they'd eaten.
Or their intake or...
Weird, right?
First aid, there might be a fucking doctor.
This case makes me furious because, like, she was so wronged. He said he'd bring back pastries regularly, especially if they had guests, and like to bring them back to Joan even when they didn't have guests because he liked pastries. He said that he couldn't see anything wrong with him having brought back pastries on numerous occasions for guests to enjoy in his home. His testimony also differed quite significantly from that of Diane, Eunice, and Effie's testimony in multiple ways. Like, their testimonies were all very similar. His differed quite substantially. John was asked if he had a patient with Joan's symptoms, would he send them to the hospital or just leave them at a house? And John replied that it would depend on the nursing care of responsible family members, along with prescribing medication to alleviate the problem. So that's basically, he was saying that what he did was correct and what he would do for a patient. If they had good family members at home that could look after and provide for that patient, he wouldn't see a need in taking them to the hospital. But if he didn't have that at home, he would send them to the hospital. He said if he'd taken Joan to the hospital the very first time she vomited, it would have been an odd reaction, and that the questioner could ask any doctor about that. There is a massive difference between taking someone to the hospital the first time they vomit and when they've been vomiting for 3 days, can't keep in any food, do any of that. They're no longer in control of their own bowels.
That's because his plan was working.
Yeah, we don't know this. We actually don't know this. He also stated that Joan was odd about going to the doctor and requested to be treated at home for everything. This went against the 3 other women's testimonies. He also said he helped Joan down the stairs, but if you can remember, Effie tried helping her and John wouldn't let her.
She can get down herself.
She can get down herself, basically. So people keep saying that they don't understand why he keeps saying that's what Joan was like with doctors. Because Joan had never given any indication to being off with the doctors in any capacity. And also, like, Ash would have known if she was. Like, Ash...
Well, yeah, it was sort of like she was young, fit, healthy. She didn't have much experience with
doctors and things.
Doctors, so
no.
she didn't have to, like.
No, but also, like, there was never any issue when she was giving birth to her son to go off to a doctor, to a hospital. That was never an issue.
Never mind the home birth.
That was not a home birth. It wasn't John, you know. It just seems odd. Now, when asked why he took her to Sharpstown Hospital, he said it was because he had an operation scheduled there for 11:30 and wanted to be close to her. He also said that she liked the treating doctor there since she'd met him at a party one time, and that Joan had said if she ever needed to be treated by another doctor, it was to be him. However, that doctor's testimony, the treating doctor that she had at the hospital, in his testimony, he stated that he'd briefly met Joan at a party and had never treated her for anything or really spoke to her much, even when they had met at this party. So there was no reason for her to be saying that she would want him to treat her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Weird.
Like, how would you... yeah.
Imagine meeting someone at a party, you're all drinking, you're all talking shit.
Oh,
Yeah. That's the one I want treating me.
Yeah, if I give the nips, I want you to talk about.
Oh my day. The what?
Nips.
What's the nips?
Snip. So.
Oh, like, I just think it's so weird. People were also concerned at the ease at which John spoke about all of these things. There wasn't so much as a tear in his eye. Again, this is a few months now since she's passed. They don't have to cry forever. Like, you can't argue that because he's not crying, it's not affecting him. I don't think it was. I'm not, but that's just
like if you're the accused of it.
Yeah, but no, look, people, like I said, grieve in different ways and things like that. I don't think that's a good enough reason not to, but like I said, I don't think he gave a shit that she died. Ultimately, John stated that the outcome would have been the same even if he had taken her to the doctors the first time she was sick. He just wouldn't be made to feel so bad about it. That was what he said. She would have died regardless, but he wished he had taken her to the doctors because at least then he wouldn't be feeling bad.
He wouldn't be questioned.
Yeah. He did say that he regretted not taking her immediately because, yeah, like I said, he wouldn't be on trial. Not because he thought that would save her, not because of anything else, just because, yeah.
And then he said he drove to hospital and cliff driving Miss Daisy.
Yeah. She reckoned it took forever to get there and she kept screaming at him to hurry up. He was asked if he studied for the truth serum test, which he agreed he had, but said he hadn't found an antidote and never administered any medication to himself, and then blamed Anne for lying to them. So he was basically like, I know Anne would make up a lie like that for you, so it would have had to be Anne telling you that he had administered something to himself to not react to the truth serum. But he just kept saying that he never found an antidote and he wasn't looking for an antidote. He just was curious about what medication they were giving him. He got an answer for everything, to be fair.
Yeah, he's got his homework done, right?
Yeah. Now, this question gets a bit tricky. He was asked if he loved Joan, and it took him a moment to respond. That is where you go, yeah, straight away also, if you're on trial. Yep, I loved her. Next question. So he was asked if he loved Joan, and it took him a moment, and then he said that he loved her, but not in a romantic, burning love type of way, and that the honeymoon was well over.
Mm-hmm.
And just going back, she loved him. Like, she loved him so much, and that's how he responded about her in her death.
Yeah, he was just if he even flat tended, she was just
lie. Yeah, about that, lie. Yeah, you may as well keep going. The grand jury requested a 1-month extension on the case, so that made John nervous. So, like, he was there thinking he was done, he would get away with this, not a bother, and they weren't instantly clearing him. So he was worried. He requested to do a polygraph test where he was told he could, if he stayed locked up for 48 hours prior under constant supervision in case he attempted to administer something to himself to prevent a proper reading. So they didn't trust him to not, give him something to calm him down to prevent his heart rate jumping and stuff. So they declined because he would stay locked up under constant supervision for 48 hours.
He wouldn't, and he couldn't be forced. He
couldn't be forced to be locked up. So he had requested to do a polygraph test, but they would not take a proper reading from it. They wouldn't allow that to be used as evidence, given that he was a doctor that would be able to administer something. And he was refusing to be locked up for 48 hours, so they went, no, they were not doing that. That's end of story. Based on all given information, the jury believed he wanted her dead, and likely did it himself. But without evidence, that could not be found. Like, they could not say. They believed it. They all believed that he wanted her dead, that he likely killed her, but there was not actual evidence to prove murder, so they could not state that they believed he had killed her without the evidence. But what could they prove? They could prove that he was a cheater and that he signed a legal document to give up his music room if he separated from Joan. and that he treated her at home and she only got worse, and that he took her to an out-of-the-way hospital and she died. They could also prove that he married his mistress within months of Joan's passing, and with all of that they could prove, they could not prove the murder. They may have gotten away with saying that Joan was negligent and that sped up her death. So, he's a liar, he's a cheater, he's a shit doctor, he can't treat his wife. But that's not murder, that's negligence.
Today's I suppose he's surely getting cured of his doctor's license now at this stage, is he?
No. He's still practicing, he's just not getting many customers. He's at the point in his career at that point where he's just getting really little cases of fixing this and fixing that on behalf of other doctors, because no one's actually trusting him to do big surgeries, no plastic surgeries, no one's wanting him to touch their boobs, no one's wanting him to touch them. There's just little bits and pieces here and there at a hospital, not even at his own practice.
So, where's his income coming from?
I don't know. So murder by omission was probably the only thing that they could have John charged with, and that's basically a charge of negligence. And that is where part 2 is being left off.
No!
So there's still at least one part left. There was so much research involved. There is so much going on. This is such a hectic case. This is not a one death case.
Dude, there's gonna be more.
There are going to be more.
Murders are murder.
Well, not to say more murders, because we don't know if this is murder. This could have just been nothing. But there will be murders to come. Definite murders.
Sounds exciting.
Sounds exciting. So no, unfortunately, that's where we're leaving off with part 2. I am trying to get the next episode out ASAP, but like I said, research takes forever.
Don't be so lazy this time.
It's not lazy, it's just so hard. I didn't even say that.
Would you tell them? You tell me every 5 minutes.
I just want this perfect. I think I want to do this case so just, I want to give Joan justice. I want everything to be so factual. I want numerous sources telling me every single thing I put into this. And I just want it flawless, and the research that goes into this is hectic. I will try and get the next one out so much earlier.
Fair, so good job done so far. Fair play.
Thank you. It's a hectic case though, isn't it? Yeah. No, but with the first one, a lot more's going on because there's so much backstory.
And we're trying to get to know everyone in the first one.
Yeah. Whereas this one, it's a lot more just what's going on at the time. There's a trial, there's this, there's that. We're just going through it. We're confirmations basically of what we heard in the first episode. That John is a scumbag.
Yes,
but is he a murderer?
Is he a murderer? Look, all the fingers point, but we need the evidence.
We need the evidence. And also, it's really weird and suspicious to me that he refused to let Ash open up his daughter's coffin to re-examine the body, saying he didn't want to disturb the grave, when he disturbed it 3 days after burial. 3 days! He couldn't let it rest for more than 3 days. That's suspicious to me.
Yeah, look, they say all fingers point to John, but who knows?
Who knows? So, no, that is, as I said, where we're leaving off, and we will be back with another episode very soon. We hope you like this one. Bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Be back soon.
Super soon.